Hello everyone, I'm really glad you're here. Tonight, I want to help you let go of the day and ease into rest. I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, and it means a lot to be part of your nightly routine. So if you haven't already, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. It truly helps. Now, settle in, close your eyes, and let's begin. Story 1. The Man in the Parking Lot. I work at a small retail store, and it shouldn't come as a surprise when I say I hate it there. The job itself is tedious, the customers are often rude, and even some of the co-workers are hard to tolerate. But it was my first job, the only one I could get with no experience, and so I stuck with it. During the winter break from school, we had about 3 weeks off, which opened up my schedule. I wasn't limited to closing shifts anymore, and when I talked to my manager about picking up some overnights, she said that would be fine. I was excited, honestly. I thought it would be more peaceful. No customers to deal with, and I'd get to work at my own pace in the quiet. Chris was the overnight manager, and I already knew him well enough. He showed me what to do during my first shift and left me to it, just the two of us working on opposite ends of the store. It felt calm, even pleasant, for a little while. That first overnight shift started off exactly as I imagined. The store was dimly lit, completely silent except for the faint hum of the ceiling lights. I could listen to music as I worked, move methodically through the aisles, and for a while it felt like a meditative experience. But that solitude wore thin faster than I expected. After a few hours, the silence stopped feeling peaceful and started to feel eerie. My mind started wandering, and I began to feel sleepy. It was just past 1:00 a.m. when I decided to take my 15-minute break. I let Chris know, grabbed my lunch from the fridge in the break room, and stepped outside into the parking lot. The lot was pitch dark except for the faint light spilling out from inside the store's windows. I sat in my car and started eating quickly, hoping to save enough time for a short nap. But before I could even finish my sandwich, I noticed something strange. Across the parking lot next to the side of the building, a figure stood motionless. There was no reason for anyone to be there, especially at that hour. The lot was completely empty aside from my car, and the figure wasn't moving, just standing. I leaned forward, squinting through the darkness, and realized he was looking into the windows of the store like he was trying to see inside. My instincts kicked in, and I decided to stay awake and observe him. He was tall, wearing a dark leather jacket and what looked like old, scuffed boots. His hair was short, and the way he stood so still made the air around him feel heavy. I kept watching him the entire 10 minutes, unease growing stronger with every second. He never turned around, never walked away, just kept peering through the glass, like he was searching for something. Eventually, my break time ended and I had to head back in. I got out of my car and tried to walk briskly toward the front entrance, hoping he wouldn't notice me. But before I got halfway across the lot, he turned. His face was pale, his eyes bloodshot, and he locked onto me with a blank, hollow stare. I didn't stop. I kept walking fast, heart pounding, and as I reached the doors, I fumbled with my key to unlock them. He began moving toward me, saying something I couldn't hear clearly. I didn't stop to listen. I slipped inside and locked the door behind me. The store lights felt too dim. The air felt colder now. Something about the way he looked at me. I knew I had to trust my gut, and my gut was screaming that this man meant trouble. I hurried to the back to use the restroom and tried to shake the nerves off, telling myself he was probably just a drifter, maybe high, maybe confused, maybe harmless. I returned to the sales floor and tried to refocus on my tasks, but a part of me couldn't resist checking the front windows again. I crept toward the entrance, expecting to see his face peering in, but he was gone. I scanned the entire parking lot, empty. I sighed in relief, trying to convince myself that maybe he'd wandered off and that it really was nothing. But that peace didn't last long. Only minutes later, around 1:30 IIM, the silence shattered. The alarm began blaring through the entire building. I knew what it meant immediately. Someone had triggered the back door alarm in the storage area. That didn't make sense. Chris and I were the only two working, and he would have shut off the alarm right away if it had been him. Still, I started heading toward the storage area, but the closer I got, the heavier my steps became. A dreadful sensation settled into my chest. Something wasn't right. Just before I reached the doors, I heard loud thudding sounds echoing from the other side. I pushed open the door cautiously, and the sound stopped. The hallway ahead was dimly lit, and at the far end, the back door stood wide open. Chris was nowhere in sight. I called his name. No answer. Instead, a head slowly peeked round the corner at the end of the hallway. I recognized those eyes instantly. Those same bloodshot, lifeless eyes from the parking lot. My breath caught. My heart skipped. Then I turned and ran. I didn't stop until I was outside in my car, hands shaking as I dialed 911. The dispatcher kept asking questions, but I barely processed the words. All I could think about was Chris. Where was he? Was he safe? Police arrived within minutes. They swept the building, guns drawn, calling out commands. Thankfully, Chris was found unharmed. He had locked himself in the manager's office. He told me the man had broken in and attacked him without warning, tried to force his way into the office. The thuds I'd heard were him pounding on the door, trying to break it down. Chris managed to call the police just moments before I had. As soon as I ran, the man bolted, vanishing before the officers arrived. They pulled a blurry image from the security camera and printed it out, hanging it in the back for all employees to see, just in case. The police took statements, dusted for fingerprints, but he was never caught. Never came back, at least. Not that we know of. I still work at the store, but I've never taken an overnight shift again. Every time I pass that back hallway, I think about how differently things could have gone if I hadn't trusted my instincts. If I'd stopped to hear what he wanted, if I'd dismissed that gut feeling. I don't know what he was planning, and I don't want to. Some people walk through this world carrying a shadow inside them, and that night, I stared directly into it. Story 2. The delivery to the forest. My name's John. I'm 23 years old and I work the overnight shift at a 24/7 bar in my town. It's one of those places people go not just for the drinks, but because the pizza is surprisingly good. We don't offer a wide variety of food, but our pizza draws enough of a crowd to keep the place busy through most nights. I've always found it strange that the owner insisted on offering delivery, considering how much hassle it brings, but we don't usually get many delivery requests during the overnight shift, so it often falls to me to handle them when they do come in. It's a side task to break up the monotony of cleaning and helping with the tables, and it gives me a moment of peace when I can step away from the noise and chaos of the bar. Most nights are a routine blur, but there was one night I'll never forget, because what started as a routine pizza drop-off turned into something that still unsettles me every time I think about it. It was about 3 a.m. when I got the order. A single large pizza, nothing unusual, and the address didn't ring any alarms at first glance. I entered it into Google Maps and grabbed the warm box from the counter. The place was about 15 minutes away, and as I slid into my car and pulled out onto the quiet, empty roads, I welcomed the silence. After the noise of a packed bar, the stillness of a late-night drive can feel like a gift. Everything felt perfectly normal as I made my way to the location, but things began to shift when the GPS cheerfully announced that I had arrived. I looked around and realized something wasn't right. I wasn't in the neighborhood. There weren't any houses or apartment complexes nearby. Instead, I found myself parked at the entrance to what looked like a forest preserve or nature trail, something that clearly wasn't meant to be a delivery destination at this hour. I double-checked the address. I thought maybe I'd misread it, or the customer had made a mistake. But no, it matched exactly what was printed on the receipt. It was pitch black beyond the curb, the kind of darkness that feels too thick for headlights to cut through. I tried calling the number listed with the order. The phone rang only once before someone picked up. I introduced myself and explained I was trying to deliver their pizza, but that I thought they had provided the wrong address. On the other end of the line there was nothing but slow, heavy breathing for a long moment. Then, in a voice that sent a chill down my spine, the man described my car. Its color, the stickers on the rear windshield, even the small dent in the back bumper. He told me to look to my left. I turned my head, confused and alert, and at first saw nothing but shadows beneath the tall trees. Then, something moved. Deep in the forest, barely visible beyond the road, was a man. He began waving his arms slowly, motioning for me to come toward him. I could tell even from that distance that it was him speaking to me on the phone. I couldn't understand why he was so far off the road, or why he hadn't just met me at the curb like a normal person. I hesitated. Everything in me was screaming that this wasn't right, but something in the way he stood there, patient and still, almost hypnotized me. Against my better judgment, I stepped out of the car with the pizza in hand. I took a few steps toward him, the air growing colder the farther I moved from the road. The forest was silent. No insects, no birds, no breeze, just heavy stillness. The man remained rooted in place, watching me. I stopped at the edge of the grass, reluctant to go any farther. I waved to him and called out, telling him to come over if he wanted the pizza, but he didn't move. Instead, he began glancing behind me and to either side, like he was scanning the area for something or someone. My nerves sharpened instantly. It felt like he wasn't just watching me, he was waiting. I told myself to walk away, to get back in the car and leave, but before I could, he started walking toward me, lost. I backed up instinctively, heart pounding. He didn't say anything, didn't yell or demand anything. He simply reached for me and grabbed my arm. His grip was strong, pulling me toward the darkness of the forest with surprising force. I struggled, panicked, kicking and twisting, but he held tight. His silence made it worse. It was like he was trying to pull me away without making a sound, like a predator avoiding detection. In that moment, a surge of adrenaline hit me. I started punching wildly, landing a few desperate hits to his face. He let go, staggering back just enough for me to rip free. I turned and ran, the pizza forgotten, stumbling back toward my car with all the energy I could summon. As I jumped in and locked the doors, I looked back and saw him disappearing into the forest. But he wasn't alone. 2 other figures emerged from behind the trees, men who had been hiding in the shadows, waiting. I hit the gas and drove straight to the nearest police station, which thankfully was just a few minutes away. By the time I got there, my hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold the steering wheel. I explained everything to the officer on duty, but when they went to check the area, the forest was empty. No signs of the men, no evidence left behind. I returned to the bar afterward, still trying to process what had just happened. I told my boss everything. He pulled up the delivery information, but there wasn't much to work with. The phone number was disconnected already, and the name on the order was clearly fake. No payment information, nothing that could be traced. He offered me the rest of the night off and gave me a free slice of pizza. I appreciated the gesture, but it felt meaningless in the face of what could have happened. I sat in my car for a long time before finally going home. My thoughts kept cycling through all the ways that situation could have turned out worse. If I had walked just a few steps further, if I hadn't fought back, if they had pulled me into the forest. It was a narrow escape, one I didn't fully understand until hours later, when the adrenaline wore off and the terror truly set in. Looking back, it's clear that the whole thing had been a trap. They lured me out there on purpose, choosing a location far from any homes, beyond the reach of any witnesses. It wasn't about pizza. It was about isolating someone, making them easy to overpower. What they wanted, whether it was a robbery, an abduction, or something even darker, I'll never know. But what stays with me is the eerie coordination of it all. The way the man didn't speak, the way he tried to drag me away without resistance, the way the others stayed hidden until the exact right moment. It wasn't random, it was calculated. Since that night, I've never looked at a late night delivery the same way. I still work the same job, but I'm cautious now. I triple check addresses. I make calls before I ever leave the parking lot. I park under street lights, keep the engine running, and never, ever walk into a dark area without backup. That night reminded me that danger doesn't always wear a mask or wave a weapon. Sometimes it waits in silence, hiding in plain sight, just beyond the tree. And if you're not paying attention, it only takes a second for a quiet night to turn into something you never imagined you'd live through. It's story 3, The Man at the Campsite. Camping has always been one of the few things that brings me peace. I don't mean the kind of camping that involves hiking miles through rough terrain or scaling mountains. I prefer the quieter, simpler kind. The kind where I walk just far enough from the city to escape its noise, set up my tent beside a familiar lake, and let the calm of the forest wrap around me like a warm blanket. That's how it was this time. Nothing adventurous, just another solo trip into a forest I'd visited many times before. My small city doesn't have much going on, and camping is how I recharge. I planned it for days. The trail to the lake was short, only about 30 minutes from the parking area, and the spot I liked most had a clear view of the water. I'd set up camp there before and never had an issue, but this time, something about the air felt heavier. Something about the silence wasn't as comforting as usual. When I arrived at the site, I saw someone already there. A man, probably in his 40s, had a tent set up close to the lake. I noticed him walking along the sand, dressed in worn swimming trunks and a stained white t-shirt. Nothing about him stood out as threatening at first glance. I chose a spot a bit further up the lake, far enough to feel private but still within sight. As I began collecting stones to build a ring for my campfire, I noticed him watching me. Not just a casual glance. He stood completely still, body turned toward me, eyes locked. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was nothing. People can be curious. Maybe he was just checking out his new neighbor. But even after minutes passed, I'd look up and see him, still standing in that same exact position, unmoving, watching. It was unsettling. I waved at him, thinking it would break the tension or prompt a friendly gesture in return. Instead, He turned around abruptly and walked away down the shoreline. No wave, no smile, no acknowledgement, just turned and walked. That small interaction made something in my chest tighten. I told myself not to overthink it. Some people are just awkward. Maybe he didn't want to be disturbed. I went on with my routine, placing my chair by the lake, watching the light dance on the water, and letting my thoughts drift. The man seemed to be gone now, and for a while, the tension eased. But 20 minutes later I saw him again. Only this time, he wasn't by the water. He was walking into the forest, just behind his tent, disappearing into the trees. I figured he might be looking for firewood or just pacing. Still, I was relieved he was gone. I took a deep breath, sat back in my chair and tried to enjoy the calm. As the sun began to lower in the sky, painting the forest in amber and gold, I gathered my gear and returned to my tent. The shadows began stretching longer, the lake now rippling under a soft breeze. I lit my fire, the warmth and crackle offering a little comfort, but that comfort quickly faded when I saw something in the woods. Far behind my campsite, just past the clearing, a white shirt stood out against the trees. I squinted, heart slowing. It was him. Standing behind a tree, unmoving, just watching again. Moved my chair to the other side of the fire, now directly facing him. I didn't want to lose sight of him. He stood there for what felt like an eternity, maybe 40 minutes. He didn't move, didn't step forward, didn't call out, just stayed rooted in place, staring. The shadows thickened as the night fell, swallowing the forest in darkness. Slowly his shape began to blend into the trees, until eventually I couldn't see him anymore. I kept looking in his direction, straining my eyes, but the blackness of the woods had hidden him. Yet the worst part was knowing he could still see me. My fire lit me up like a stage. I was exposed while he remained hidden, invisible and silent. Fear began to cloud my mind. I debated breaking down camp and leaving, but the idea of turning my back on the forest terrified me more. What if he was waiting for that? What if he followed me out? I decided to stay. I stayed up through the night, tending the fire, keeping it burning bright. Every creak of a branch made my stomach clench. Every breeze that rustled the trees made me hold my breath. I kept watching the forest, even though I couldn't see a thing. Hours crawled by like days, and though I never saw him again, I knew in my bones he was still there, still watching, still waiting for something I couldn't understand. By the time the first pale rays of sunlight stretched across the trees, I stood up and started packing. My hands trembled, but I didn't stop moving. I took one last glance toward his campsite. His tent was still there, still set up, but I hadn't seen him return to it, not once. Not the night before, not in the morning. There were no signs of movement. I didn't wait to find out more. I loaded my gear and made my way back to the parking area, glancing over my shoulder every few minutes. The trail felt longer than it had on the way in. Every sound, every snap of a twig made me jump. But I didn't see him again. I didn't see anyone. I don't know who that man was or what he wanted. Maybe he was just strange. Maybe he was dangerous. Or maybe he was something else entirely. I'll never really know. What I do know is that he wasn't camping like a regular person. He never went into his tent, never sat by a fire, never cooked or wandered. All he did was watch. And there's something deeply, unnatural about that. Something that still makes my skin crawl. Since that trip, I haven't gone camping alone again. I still think about that night often. That white shirt among the trees. That eerie stillness in the forest. That quiet feeling of being prey without knowing why. And I listen to that feeling now, every time. The story 4. The Domino's Lot Stalker. 20 years ago, I worked as a pizza delivery driver for a neighborhood shop called Domino, tucked into a corner on the edge of a quiet New Jersey town. By day, the area had a steady rhythm, families shopping, kids riding bikes, but by night, the streets emptied out. There was a stillness that set in, broken only by the occasional passing car or the muffled sound of a television leaking through apartment windows. It was the kind of quiet that could either feel peaceful or deeply isolating. That night, it felt like the latter. I was working a late shift, one of those long nights that stretched until 2 in the morning. Around 1 o'clock, I was sitting inside the store when a delivery came in. It wasn't anything special, just another order, another name, another address. I grabbed the pizza and exited through the back door, heading to the small employee parking lot behind the building. As soon as I stepped outside, I saw someone near my car. He wasn't doing anything obvious, just standing there. But the moment he noticed me, he moved. Quickly, almost too quickly. He ducked behind a pair of large metal dumpsters and vanished from sight before I could process what I'd just seen. My heart kicked up a notch, but I told myself it was probably nothing. Maybe someone cutting through the lot, maybe a random drifter looking for something to eat. I approached my car cautiously, glancing around as I got in. The air felt colder than before, but nothing seemed out of place. I drove off and made the delivery, brushing away the unease as best I could. When I returned, I walked back inside the store and went about my duties. The staff was limited at that hour, just a few of us trying to finish out the shift and make it through the last orders of the night. About 30 minutes later, another delivery came in. I took the slip, grabbed the pizza and headed outside again, through the same back door. This time, everything looked quiet at first. I walked halfway to my car when I heard footsteps behind me, quick, soft, deliberate. I turned around, and there he was again, the same man. I recognized the shape of his coat, the way he held his arms close to his sides. He was moving toward me, not walking, not running, something in between. I didn't wait to see what he wanted. I hurried the rest of the way to my car, got in and slammed the door shut, locking it before he could get close. He stopped just a few feet away from my window. For a long, silent moment, he just stood there, looking at me. No words, no gestures, no expression, just watching. Turned the key and started the engine. My hands were shaking a little. I expected him to knock, maybe try to talk to me, but he didn't. He stood there as I reversed out of the lot and drove away. The rest of the delivery went smoothly, but my mind wasn't on the pizza anymore. I couldn't stop thinking about him, his silence, his timing, how he had waited until I was alone in the dark. I returned again, hoping maybe the night would just move on, that this would be the last I saw of him. But fate had other plans. After pulling into my usual spot, I stepped out of the car and immediately felt that same dread tighten around my chest. There he was again. Not standing near my car this time, but emerging from behind a co-worker's vehicle. This time he wasn't hiding. He wasn't walking away. He was standing beside the back door, the one I had just used minutes before. He was watching me again. And the intent was clearer now. This wasn't chance. This wasn't a lost wanderer or a homeless man looking for scraps. He was waiting. for me. I paused, heart racing, debating whether to try and confront him or go back inside. But I didn't do either. Instead, I walked around the edge of the lot, circling wide, avoiding the back door completely. I made my way to the front entrance and rang the bell. One of my co-workers saw me and unlocked the door. I stepped inside and immediately told them what had happened. The tension in my voice must have been convincing, because they didn't doubt a word. We called the police together, reporting the strange man and his persistent behavior. No one left the store until the officers arrived. They checked the area thoroughly, but by the time they showed up, the man was gone again. No signs of him behind the dumpsters, no footprints in the snow, no clues to who he was or what he wanted. They took a brief statement and told us to call again if he came back. That night, I didn't see him again. I made my final delivery and returned before clocking out and heading home, but the weight of what happened stayed with me. I kept wondering what would have happened if I'd tried to use that back door again, if I hadn't noticed him in time, if I'd been just a little slower getting into my car. Some nights, I'd park in a different part of the lot, hoping to change my routine, just in case he was watching. Other times, I'd ask a co-worker to walk with me, pretending we were just having a conversation, so I wouldn't be alone. But I never saw him again, not after that night. And maybe that should have been reassuring, but in some strange way it made things worse, because there was no closure, no arrest, no name, just a blank space where a person should be. A silence that followed me into every delivery I made from then on. Working late nights in a quiet town, you don't expect danger, you expect boredom, maybe fatigue, maybe the occasional weird customer. But this felt different. It felt like I'd been chosen for something, like he'd studied my habits and waited for the perfect time to appear. And even though nothing happened, no confrontation, no attack, the threat lingered. It was the possibility that haunted me, the almost, the what if. That man never said a single word. He didn't have to. His presence was loud enough. To this day I remember his eyes. They weren't wild or angry. They weren't desperate or deranged. They were calm, focused, like he had all the time in the world. I think that's what chilled me the most. And while I no longer deliver pizzas, I still remember those footsteps, that silence, that presence just a few feet behind me. Every time I walk through a dark parking lot now, a part of me is back in that moment, watching the shadows, listening for footsteps, and wondering if he ever stopped watching too. Story 5. The Man at the Door. This happened back in 1996, and even though decades have passed, I can still recall the fear that settled in my chest that night, as if it had just happened yesterday. I was 13 years old, living in a quiet neighborhood with my parents and older sister. It was a Friday night, and our parents had gone out for the evening. They left some money and told us to order a pizza, reminding us to lock the doors and behave. It was supposed to be a fun, low-key night, nothing unusual, nothing scary. I spent the early evening playing video games in my room, while my sister, who was 16, stayed in hers. Eventually, hunger crept in, and I left my room, suggesting we order that pizza. We were both excited to eat and hang out in the living room with the TV on, completely oblivious to the strange turn the night was about to take. We placed the order and waited. The pizza arrived not too long afterward. My sister answered the door, paid the delivery driver, and brought the food into the kitchen. I was still in the living room when I heard the front door click shut behind her. As I stood to head toward the kitchen, I heard a noise that stopped me in my tracks. the distinct sound of the front doorknob rattling, as if someone outside was trying to open it, wasn't the wind. It wasn't the door settling. It was the unmistakable sound of someone twisting the handle with intention. My first thought was that maybe the pizza guy had forgotten something, or had returned for some reason, but I wasn't sure. I quietly walked to the front window and peeked outside. I didn't get a clear look, just a brief glimpse of someone moving quickly away from the house, vanishing around the side toward the driveway. The motion was too fast and too vague to give me any real details. I called out for my sister and told her what I saw. Together we checked the windows, hoping to find no one out there. Nothing, just the quiet of the night and the soft hum of suburban stillness. We figured it must have been a mistake. Maybe someone lost or a kid pulling a prank. We went back to the living room, sat down with our pizza and tried to shake off the unease. But the tension remained, clinging to the air like static. Not 10 minutes later, there was a knock on the front door. A loud, deliberate knock that made both of us freeze. We crept over to the front window and looked out. Standing on the doorstep was a man. He wasn't the delivery guy. He wasn't someone we recognized. He was tall, wearing dark clothing, and his face was cast in shadows. His posture was rigid. He didn't look like he was lost or in need of help. He looked like he didn't belong there. We didn't know what to do. Our parents were unreachable. This was before cell phones were common, and calling them wasn't an option. We stayed frozen in place, hearts pounding, watching the man as he stood there for another moment, then stepped back and disappeared from view. We waited in silence, hoping he had left. But then we heard it, the faint sound of the back doorknob rattling just like before. This time it was more frantic, more aggressive. Whoever this was, he wasn't giving up. My sister, trying to stay calm, picked up the house phone and dialed 911. I stayed in the living room, listening. The house suddenly felt massive, every creak and shadow magnified by fear. As my sister spoke to the dispatcher, I moved to check some of the other windows. I couldn't see him anymore, but I felt his presence, somewhere out there in the dark, watching, waiting for a mistake. The dispatcher assured my sister that officers were on the way. We huddled in the center of the house, avoiding windows, avoiding doorways, trying to make ourselves as invisible as possible. The wait felt like hours, though I know it couldn't have been more than 10 or 15 minutes. When the police arrived, they circled the house with flashlights, sweeping the yard and checking the perimeter. At first, they didn't see anyone. They asked us to stay inside while they looked. We gave them our account, described the man as best we could, and told them about the door rattling. They took it seriously, which was a relief. Then, something unexpected happened. One of the officers radioed the others. They had found someone hiding behind a tree in our backyard, the very man we'd seen at the front door. He hadn't left. He had been there the entire time, just out of sight, lurking in the dark. When they arrested him, they didn't find any weapons, but his intent was clear. He wasn't lost. He wasn't confused. He had waited. He had tried to get in more than once, and if we hadn't locked those doors, if we had opened one just to check, who knows what might have happened. The police told us we had done the right thing by calling when we did. They never told us exactly who he was or what his motive might have been. But we never saw him again. My parents were horrified when they found out. They felt guilty for not being there, though we never blamed them. We were just grateful the man had been caught before he could do anything worse. That night changed something in me. I started double-checking locks before going to bed. I stopped answering the door unless I was expecting someone. I learned that fear doesn't always come in loud bangs or dramatic screams. It can come in the quiet rattling of a doorknob in the dark. It can come in the shape of a man's shadow standing silently on your doorstep. Even now, as an adult, I sometimes wake in the middle of the night and listen. I check the doors one more time. I remember how vulnerable we were, how quickly things went from normal to terrifying. That memory is stitched into the fabric of who I am. It's a reminder that the safest places can still hold danger, and that sometimes the scariest moments are the ones when nothing happens, because it almost did. It was the night I learned that locking a door could be the difference between safety and something far worse. 2006, the backdoor trap. When I was 20 years old, I took a part-time job as a pizza delivery driver. It wasn't glamorous, but it was flexible and fit easily into my college schedule. The town I lived in was small, the roads familiar, and most nights were uneventful. My car was new enough to be reliable, and the money from tips made the whole thing worth it. I got used to the rhythm of the job, the rush during dinner hours, the quiet lulls in the late evening. Most customers were polite. A few were forgetful or awkward, but it was easy work, predictable. That was what I liked about it. It wasn't until about 6 months in that something happened to remind me just how quickly predictability can turn to danger. It was a Saturday night, and the shift had been busier than usual. I'd been running back and forth on deliveries, barely having time to grab water or sit down. Still, it meant good tips, so I didn't mind. Things slowed down around 1 in the morning. I was seated near the register when another order came in, just a side of cheesy bread. Simple enough. I took the slip, grabbed the box and punched the address into my phone. It was about 10 minutes away, in a part of town I had driven through before but didn't know well. Residential, quiet, dark. When I arrived, I pulled up to the curb and double-checked the house number. The porch light wasn't on, and there didn't seem to be any lights inside. That struck me as odd, but I'd had customers before who liked to save electricity or just forgot to leave something on. I got out of the car and approached the front door. That's when I saw the note. It was taped to the door, written in messy handwriting. Please use back door. At first, I hesitated. A little voice in the back of my mind told me it wasn't right. Why would someone order delivery so late and not be ready to meet me at the front? Still, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe the front door was jammed. Maybe they had dogs they didn't want to let out. Maybe they lived alone and didn't feel like cleaning the front porch. I didn't want to be paranoid, and besides, the food hadn't been paid for yet. I didn't want to return empty-handed or have to explain to my boss that I'd bailed over a sticky note. I walked around the side of the house, following the path through an overgrown lawn. It was eerily silent. No breeze, no crickets, no faint television glow. Just darkness and the muffled sound of my own footsteps on the grass. I reached the backyard and spotted the back door. There was no porch light, no screen, nothing but a dark wooden door set into the siding. I knocked, lightly at first, then a bit louder when no one responded. I stood there for about 30 seconds. Still nothing. Then I heard it, the sound of soft footsteps inside. The door creaked open slightly, but no one stood in the frame. It was like someone had opened it and then quickly stepped behind it, hiding from view. I didn't move. I didn't call out. I just stood there, the box of cheesy bread in hand, trying to figure out what to do. "Hello?" I asked cautiously. "It's the delivery." Still no response. The silence was deep, unnatural. Something didn't sit right. I took a half step back, and that's when I heard it. Another door opening. Not the one in front of me, but the front door around the side of the house. I didn't know what to think. Why would they open the back and the front at the same time? Were there multiple people in the house? I turned to leave, sensing that something wasn't right. As I turned, I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. Someone was standing at the far edge of the backyard, near the side gate. He was partially obscured by the shadows, but I could see enough. A man in a ski mask. He stepped forward, slowly, deliberately. My blood ran cold. I didn't wait. I dropped the food and bolted, running back the way I'd come. I didn't look behind me. I didn't care if he chased me. I just ran, heart pounding so loudly it drowned out everything else. I made it back to the front yard, around the corner and to my car in what felt like seconds. I dove inside, locked the doors and started the engine. My hands were shaking so hard I struggled to grip the wheel. I drove straight back to the restaurant, replaying every detail in my mind. The note, the silence, the hidden door. Someone had planned that. Someone had set a trap. When I got back to work, I tried to explain what happened. My co-workers laughed at first, thinking it was a prank. But I wasn't laughing. My voice cracked when I told them about the man in the mask, about the way the door opened with no one there. My manager looked concerned, but said there wasn't much we could do. The phone number on the order was a prepaid cell, now disconnected. The name listed on the ticket was probably fake. There was no camera footage, no receipt, no payment to trace. Just a memory I couldn't shake and a deep, gnawing fear that stayed with me long after I clocked out. I never made a delivery to that neighborhood again. In fact, I quit the job about a month later, not because I hated it, but because something in me had changed. I couldn't pull into a dark driveway without imagining someone lurking in the shadows. I couldn't walk to a door without checking every window for movement. That night robbed me of my peace, of the simple trust I once had in people. It made me see how easily someone could lure you into danger under the guise of something as harmless as delivering bread. It reminded me that danger doesn't always wear fangs or carry weapons. Sometimes it waits silently behind a door, hoping you'll step through first. Even now, years later, I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I'd gone inside. If I'd walked through that open door, trying to be polite, trying not to seem suspicious. I wonder what was waiting in the dark. I'll never know. And that's what unsettles me most, not what happened, but what almost did. That man in the mask wasn't expecting me to run. He expected me to step forward. And had I taken just one more step, I don't think I'd be here to tell this story. Story 7, The Whispering Hotel Room. I was traveling alone for a business conference, and with a limited budget, I had to skip the fancy hotels and book something more modest. I found a small place online, situated just outside a quiet town. The pictures looked decent, nothing luxurious, but clean and functional. Some reviews were fine, though a few mentioned odd noises or a strange atmosphere. I figured those were exaggerations, or people being picky. After all, it was only for 2 nights. I didn't think much of it as I pulled into the gravel lot and stepped out with my suitcase. The building looked older in person than it had in the photos. The paint was peeling and the sign above the entrance flickered slightly, but I still didn't feel uneasy, just tired. The man at the front desk was elderly and barely spoke. He slid over a worn key card with my room number scribbled in pen. No smiles, no welcome, just a nod and a gesture toward the hallway. I walked the length of the narrow corridor, the carpet dull and uneven beneath my feet. The room was at the far end. When I opened the door, a wave of musty air greeted me. The bed was stiff, the wallpaper was faded, and the only window faced the brick wall. But again, I wasn't there for I unpacked my things and opened my laptop, needing to finish some work before turning in. The hours ticked by, and around 1 a.m., I decided to try sleeping despite the uncomfortable mattress. At first, the silence was peaceful, but it didn't last long. A sudden, rhythmic thumping sound started from the room next door. It wasn't loud enough to be shouting or music, more like someone slamming furniture against the wall repeatedly. I sat up, irritated. It was late. Who makes that kind of noise at this hour? I considered calling the front desk, but figured it would stop soon. The pounding continued on and off for nearly half an hour. I turned on some white noise on my phone and tried to ignore it. Just as I started to drift off, I heard something that pulled me right out of sleep. Soft whispering. Not from the wall, but from the hallway. It was faint, like someone whispering just outside my door. A man's voice, quiet and pleading. "Somebody help me, please." My body tensed, and I sat up in the darkness. The whisper was so clear I couldn't tell if it was real or something from a dream. I slowly walked to the door and looked through the peephole. The hallway was empty. No shadows, no motion, nothing. I stood there for a minute, waiting to see if someone would walk by, but no one came. Eventually, I returned to bed, still unsure whether I had actually heard anything, but the silence returned, and exhaustion finally took me under. In the morning, something strange caught my eye. My door was slightly ajar. I was certain I had closed it fully the night before. I always checked that. I chalked it up to being tired, maybe not shutting it hard enough. Downstairs, I asked the clerk at the front desk if anyone had been staying in the room next to mine. He barely looked up from his newspaper and said he didn't know, that was all. No follow-up, no checking the record, just silence. I let it go and spent the rest of the day at the conference, trying to shake the feeling from the night before. When I returned that evening, something else was off. My laptop, which I had left on the desk, was now resting on the bed. I hadn't touched it since I left that morning. I knew without a doubt that I hadn't moved it. Nothing else was missing. Nothing appeared broken, but that one detail gnawed at me. Still, I told myself I must be overthinking. Maybe I moved it and forgot. I was tired. It had been a long week. I told myself these things to avoid acknowledging the deeper fear building in my gut. That night, I made sure to lock everything. I triple-checked the door, jammed a chair against it, and tried to relax. I needed sleep, but around 2 a.m., I was woken again. This time, it wasn't a whisper or a knock. It was a loud crash, something heavy falling over in the next room. Then, silence. Then, slow footsteps moving down the hallway. My heart pounded in my chest as I listened. The footsteps stopped in front of my room. I held my breath. The doorknob didn't move, and nothing happened for nearly a minute. Then I heard something even worse. A slow, scraping sound. It was coming from inside my room. The closet. A soft scratching that grew louder and more desperate, like something, or someone, was trying to claw its way out. I sat frozen, not daring to move, not daring to breathe. After a long moment, I mustered the courage to turn on the light and walk to the closet. The scratching stopped instantly. I opened the door. There was nothing inside but a few wooden hangers and a spare blanket. But I could still feel it, the presence, the tension in the air, the way every instinct in me screamed to get out. I barely slept the rest of the night. The moment the sun rose, I packed everything up and checked out without looking back. As I handed in the key, I asked again if they'd had issues with the rooms. This time the old man behind the counter paused. He looked at me with tired eyes and said, "Some guests say they hear things. We don't ask questions anymore." Back home, I did some digging. It turns out the hotel had a long history of bizarre reports, break-ins, disappearances, unexplained deaths. Nothing official, nothing confirmed. Just whispers, like the one I'd heard in the hallway. I don't know what happened during those 2 nights. Maybe someone tried to get into my room. Maybe someone already had. Or maybe the place was haunted by more than bad reviews. All I know is that I will never go back. And when I travel now, I pay more attention to the reviews that talk about sounds in the night. Because sometimes they're not exaggerating. Sometimes they're the only warning you'll get. Story 8. Room 217. I used to work the night shift at a small hotel located just off the highway. Most nights were routine, with little more than a late check-in or the occasional phone call asking for directions. The place didn't attract much attention. It wasn't luxurious, but it was clean, affordable, and conveniently located. After midnight, it usually quieted down entirely. Just me behind the front desk, the glow of the monitors, and the hum of vending machines in the background. But one night was different. The kind of night that doesn't just disrupt your routine, it stays with you for years afterward, echoing in the silence and making you rethink every moment you spent alone behind that desk. It started with a phone call around 1 a.m. The line rang only once before I picked it up. A voice on the other end, a man, said he needed a room urgently. I explained that we were fully booked for the night and asked if he had a reservation. There was a long pause. Then he repeated, quietly but firmly, that he needed a room and that it was important. Something about the tone made my skin crawl. I told him again that we had no vacancies and offered the names of a couple of nearby hotels. He didn't thank me. He just hung up without another word. I shook it off. Strange calls were part of working overnights, and I didn't think much more about it, at least not right away. An hour later, the front doors slid open and a man walked in. I recognized the voice immediately. He didn't speak at first, just approached the counter and handed me a crumpled piece of paper. On it, scrawled in thick, shaky letters, was the number 217. Below it, a message, "I need this room. No one else should know." I felt a chill crawl up my spine. Room 217 wasn't even available that night. It had been blocked off for maintenance. I told him this, trying to keep my voice steady, but he just stared at me and slowly pulled a thick wad of cash from his pocket, slamming it onto the counter. No words, just money and expectation. I told him, firmly this time, that I couldn't give him a room without a reservation, ID or any proper check-in procedure. I asked him to leave. His eyes didn't move from mine. He said nothing. Eventually he turned around and walked out the front doors. I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Still rattled, I decided to check the security footage. Everything looked normal, nothing out of place. I switched off the monitor and tried to focus on the stack of paperwork beside me. But I couldn't shake the unease. Something about him had been off. Like he didn't just want a room, he needed it desperately. And he didn't care how he got it. Around 3 a.m., I heard a loud bang from the floor above. It was heavy, like a chair being thrown or a table knocked over. I grabbed the master keycard and cautiously climbed the stairs. When I reached the second floor, I noticed right away that the door to room 217 was ajar. That wasn't possible. I stood there for a moment, staring at the partially open door, the dim hallway light casting strange shadows across the threshold with my heart in my throat. I slowly pushed the door open. The room was dark, too dark. The bed was unmade, blankets twisted and halfway on the floor. A handkerchief lay near the foot of the bed, stained with something dark, maybe ink, maybe something worse. I backed out slowly and turned to leave, but I wasn't alone. At the end of the hallway near the emergency exit stood the man. He was watching me. I couldn't make out his face clearly, but I knew it was him. I didn't call out, I didn't ask questions. I ran, down the stairs past the vending machines, back to the front desk, where I called the police with shaking fingers. When they arrived, the man was already gone. They searched the building, checked the room, and reviewed the security footage, but the video feed from that time was corrupted, just static, nothing usable. It was like he had never been there at all. The police didn't find anything else. No signs of forced entry, no ID, no fingerprints, just the stained cloth and a room that felt impossibly colder than the rest of the hotel. I tried to explain everything, but without hard evidence, there wasn't much they could do. They filed a report and told me to contact them if anything else happened. After they left, I sat behind the desk, staring at the monitors, trying to understand what I had just experienced. The rest of the shift passed in silence. No guests came down, no more calls, just the ticking of the clock and the hum of lights above me. I kept working there for a few more months, but something had changed in me. Every creak of the floor, every gust of wind felt like a warning. I checked the footage more often, walked the halls more cautiously. Room 217 was never reopened for guests. They said it was still under maintenance, but no one ever went in, no cleaners, no staff. The door remained locked, and sometimes, when I worked alone, I thought I could hear soft footsteps above me in the quietest part of the night, slow, deliberate, and always ending at the door to 217. Eventually I left the job. I told myself it was just to find something with better pay or daytime hours, but the truth was I couldn't take another night of that silence, of wondering if he'd come back, of fearing that maybe he never left. To this day I still think about that man, that room, and whatever was waiting behind that door. Not all ghosts rattle chains. Some of them carry folded paper and know exactly what they're looking for. Story 9. The Man by the Pool. Many years ago, during the crisp, cooling nights of early October, my friend Mike and I were driving back from a long, fulfilling road trip. The sun had set before we realized we were still too far from home to make it the rest of the way that night. Instead of pushing ourselves to keep driving, we decided to pull off the highway and check into a modest hotel just outside a small town. It was a kind of place that didn't ask too many questions and offered warm showers and reasonably clean beds. Tired but still riding the high from our trip, we wanted to wind down a bit before turning in. When we saw that the hotel had a hot tub, we figured a soak under the stars was the perfect way to end the evening. After checking in, we changed into our swim trunks and walked down to the outdoor pool area. The pool itself had been closed for maintenance, a chemical treatment judging by the sign posted near the gate, but the hot tub was still open, and that was all we really wanted. The evening was clear, the sky dotted with stars, and the air had that early autumn chill that made the hot water feel even more welcoming. The lighting around the pool area was dim, casting long shadows across the ground. It wasn't exactly inviting, but it was quiet, peaceful. We eased into the bubbling water and let the warmth soak into our tired muscles. The silence felt earned. The day had been long, the miles endless. Now, it was just us, floating beneath the stars. As we sat there, talking about our trip and laughing about small moments from the week, the conversation drifted into deeper topics. Life after college, family tensions, the uncertainty of growing up. We felt grounded in that moment, two friends sharing something simple and good. But then, something changed. I felt it first, a sense that we weren't alone anymore. I looked up and saw a figure at the edge of the pool area, standing still in the shadows. At first I thought it was just another guest, maybe someone else coming out for a soak. But they didn't move, they didn't speak, they just stood there, watching. I whispered to Mike, asking if he saw what I was seeing. He nodded, eyes fixed on the silhouette. The figure was tall, dressed in dark clothing, and completely still. There was something about the way they stood, too rigid, too silent, that sent a chill through my chest. I asked Mike what we should do, and he shrugged, trying to shake it off, suggesting maybe the guy was just trying to decide if it was worth changing into swimwear for a quick dip. Still, we both felt it, the discomfort creeping in, the temperature of the night suddenly feeling colder despite the water's warmth. We tried to keep our conversation going, but our attention never truly left the figure at the edge of the patio. Minutes passed. The man never moved, didn't approach, didn't leave, just stood there, watching. The longer it went on, the less it felt like normal behavior. Mike eventually called out to him, saying something like, "Hey!" "The pool's closed if that's what you're looking for." There was no response, no flinch, no shift in posture. It was like he hadn't heard or didn't care. The silence grew louder with each passing second. Mike looked at me and nodded, and I knew what he meant. It was time to go. We carefully stood up, climbing out of the hot tub and grabbing our towels. We tried not to make it look rushed, but inside my heart was hammering. As we dried off, the man suddenly turned and walked away. Slowly, deliberately, not in a hurry, not acknowledging us, just fading back into the darkness beyond the pool gate. We didn't speak again until he was out of sight. We headed straight back to our room, locking the door behind us. The whole encounter felt surreal, unresolved. We tried to laugh it off, cracking jokes about creepy hotel ghosts and awkward strangers, but the unease remained. Neither of us slept well that night. I kept replaying the moment in my head, the stillness of that figure, the way he seemed to wait for something, the way he left only when we stood to leave. In the morning, we packed quickly. The sun was up, the parking lot quiet, and the strange weight from the night before still lingered. We turned in our room keys at the front desk and hit the road. We were eager to put the night behind us. But a few days later, Mike called me. He had found an article in a local newspaper. It was about a man who had been found dead near that very hotel, his body discovered floating in the pool that had been closed for maintenance. According to the article, he had been living in the woods nearby and was known to frequent the hotel property late at night. We couldn't say for sure if the man we saw was the same person. We had never seen his face clearly. But the timeline fit, the location fit, the stillness, the way he lingered in the shadows, it all fit too perfectly. If it was him, then we saw him only hours before he died. And if it wasn't him, then it meant someone else had been standing there, watching us in the dark for reasons we still don't understand. Either way, it unsettled us. It changed the way we saw those quiet roadside hotels. It made us aware of how fragile the line is between peace and danger, between a normal night and something far stranger. I don't know what he wanted. I don't know why he stood there in silence or why he left when he did. Maybe he was lonely, maybe he wanted help, or maybe he was just trying to feel connected to people one last time before vanishing into the night. The truth is, I'll never know. But I think about him every time I pass a hotel like that. Every time I see a hot tub under a starry sky, I think about the man by the pool, standing still in the dark, watching, waiting, and walking away with answers we'll never get. Story 10. The window knock at 3 a.m. I was 17 when this happened, still living at home with my parents in a quiet suburban neighborhood tucked at the edge of a rural town. Our street was the kind of place where kids rode bikes until dark, neighbors waved across driveways, and porch lights flickered on at the same time every night. Nothing dangerous ever happened here, at least not that we knew of. But one night, something disrupted that peace in a way that stayed with me for years. I've never told this story outside my immediate family. It was late, well past midnight, and I was up reading in bed with headphones on. Everyone else in the house had long since gone to sleep. The only light came from my lamp and the dim glow of the hallway under my bedroom door. At some point, I must have dozed off. I woke up to silence. My headphones had fallen off, my book still open on my chest. I glanced at the clock. 3:04 a.m. The room felt still, the air heavy in the way it sometimes does when you wake suddenly. I was about to turn off the lamp and roll over when I heard it. A knock. Not from my door, not from inside the house. From my window. Just a soft, deliberate knock, once, then twice more. I froze. My window faced the side of the house, looking out onto a narrow strip of grass and a row of hedges. There was no street lamp there, no reason anyone would be standing outside. I stayed still, trying to convince myself it was the wind or a branch. Then it came again. 3 slow knocks, louder this time. My heart began to race. I reached out and switched off the lamp, plunging the room into darkness. I sat in silence, holding my breath, listening. I could hear the faint rustle of leaves outside, but nothing else. No voice, no footsteps, just a presence. I slowly got up and crept toward the window, keeping my body low. I gently pulled back the corner of the curtain just enough to peek out. At first I saw nothing, just a reflection of my room against the glass. But then my eyes adjusted, and I saw him. A man standing inches from the window, face close to the glass, staring directly at me. I fell backward in shock, gasping as I scrambled across the floor. I didn't scream. I couldn't. My voice caught in my throat as fear took over. I crawled toward the door and quietly opened it, slipping into the hallway. My parents' room was across the hall. I knocked, then pushed the door open, whispering frantically to wake them. My dad got up immediately when he saw the look on my face. I told him someone was outside my window. He grabbed the baseball bat from the closet and headed for the front door, telling my mum to call the police. I followed closely behind, heart pounding in my ears. He flipped on the porch light, yanked open the door, and stepped outside into the cool night. We moved around the side of the house, flashlights in hand, but there was no one there. Just the grass and hedges, undisturbed. No footprints, no broken branches, nothing to show that anyone had been there. It was like he had vanished into the darkness the moment I left the room. The police arrived shortly after. They checked the yard, took a statement and said there had been a few reports of suspicious activity in nearby neighborhoods. Someone knocking on windows, then disappearing before they could be caught. They couldn't say for sure if it was the same person, but their tone made it clear they didn't expect to find him. That night, I didn't go back to sleep. None of us did. My dad stayed up in the living room with the lights on, and I slept on the floor beside the couch. Every little sound made me jump. The knock wasn't just in my head anymore. It echoed, repeating itself in my mind over and over. The image of that man's face, pale, expressionless, too calm, haunted me. He hadn't looked angry or desperate. He looked patient, and somehow that made it worse. It made it feel like he wasn't just passing through, like he had picked that window, picked me. In the days that followed, my dad installed motion-activated lights and cameras around the house. He trimmed back the hedges so no one could hide behind them. We kept the windows locked at all times, and I moved my bed away from the wall. For weeks I couldn't sleep without checking every window, every closet, every shadow. Even though he never returned, at least not that we knew of. His absence didn't bring peace. It left a hole filled with uncertainty. Was he watching from somewhere else? Did he ever come back and find the lights too bright, the yard too open? Or did he move on to someone else's window? Someone who didn't wake up in time? Years have passed since that night, but I still think about it often. Every time I hear a knock late at night, every time I stay somewhere new and find myself near a window, I always keep the blinds closed. I always check the locks twice. People say it's just paranoia, that nothing happened in the end. But something did. That knock was real. That face was real, and there's something terrifying in the idea that danger can stand just inches away from you, separated only by glass, and you might never know until it's too late. That night taught me that fear doesn't always come crashing in. Sometimes it knocks softly, patiently, waiting for you to look. Now, whenever someone says they love the quiet stillness of the night, I understand it. But I also know that stillness can carry something else. Something waiting. Something that doesn't need to speak, doesn't need to break in, doesn't even need to move. Just presence. Just eyes through a window at 3 a.m, watching, waiting for you to come closer. And even though I never opened that window, I still feel like something stepped inside. Story 11. The Campground Stranger. Back in 2015, I decided to take a solo camping trip upstate. I'd been feeling overwhelmed by work, worn thin by city life, and I needed space to breathe. I found a quiet campground that wasn't too far from the main road, but still remote enough to feel like I'd escaped the world. It was early autumn and the leaves were just starting to change colour. The air was crisp, but not cold. I arrived mid-afternoon, picked a secluded site near the edge of the woods, and began setting up my tent. The forest surrounded me on 3 sides, tall trees swaying gently in the breeze, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could actually exhale. There were only a few other campers spread throughout the area. An older couple a few sites away, a family further down near the trail entrance, and one solo camper I saw walking in the opposite direction as I arrived. We nodded politely as we passed each other, but no words were exchanged. Once I settled in, I gathered some firewood and prepared for a simple evening. Just me, the trees, and a crackling fire. I made dinner, sat back in my foldable chair, and watched the shadows grow long across the forest floor. The peacefulness felt earned, and as the sun dipped below the horizon, I felt more grounded than I had in a long time. As night took over, the campground fell into a soft hush. I could hear the occasional rustle of leaves, the distant croak of frogs by the water, and the faint crackle of campfires from a few sites over. Around 10 p.m, I climbed into my tent, zipped it shut, and turned off my lantern. I lay there listening to the sounds of the forest, slowly drifting towards sleep. But just as I was slipping under, I heard footsteps, soft, deliberate, coming from the woods directly behind my tent. My heart rate picked up. I held my breath, listening carefully, thinking maybe it was an animal, a raccoon, maybe a deer. But the steps were too steady, too controlled. Not the erratic pacing of wildlife. They moved slowly around the back of the tent, then stopped. Silence. I sat up, staring into the darkness, waiting for something, anything, to follow. After a long pause, the steps continued, this time circling to the side of the tent. I stayed completely still. No flashlight, no sound. Whoever it was didn't speak, didn't call out. They just walked slowly around the perimeter of my tent, each step crushing leaves beneath their boot. When they reached the front, just feet from where I sat frozen, they stopped again. I could feel the presence just beyond the fabric, separated by a thin layer of nylon. No movement, no breathing, just stillness. Then came the sound I still can't forget, the slow gliding zip of my tent's outer flap. Not the main zipper, but the small ventilation layer that covered the front. I hadn't touched that zipper since setting up camp, I was sure of it. I didn't know what to do. My phone was just inches away, but I didn't want to make a sound, didn't want to draw attention to myself. I reached slowly, silently, and grabbed it, turning on the flashlight in one sudden motion and unzipping the main tent door. I burst out into the night, shining the light everywhere. The beam bounced between the trees, lighting up empty branches and shadows, but no person, no figure, no footsteps running away. I called out into the darkness. Nothing. No movement, no reply, just trees swaying in the wind, and the sound of my own breath echoing back at me. I stood there for a few minutes, flashlight trembling in my grip, scanning every direction. Eventually I forced myself to calm down. I told myself it could have been another camper, someone lost, maybe even playing a prank. But the longer I stood there, the less that explanation made sense. Who walks quietly around a tent at night and unzips it without saying a word? I checked the flap, and sure enough, the zipper was halfway down, exactly where I had heard it stop. I stayed up the rest of the night, sitting by the fire with a small hatchet in my lap, listening for any sound out of place. Nothing else happened. At sunrise, I packed everything in record time. I didn't even bother making coffee. I just wanted out of there. As I passed the other campsites on my way to the car, I noticed something odd. The solo camper I'd seen on the way in was gone. His tent was still up, but it looked empty. Zipped, but deflated, like someone had left in the middle of the night. I debated checking it, but decided not to. I just kept walking. I stopped at the ranger station on the way out and reported what had happened. The ranger took notes, nodded quietly, and told me I wasn't the first person to report strange encounters in that area. Most of them involved people hearing noises at night, footsteps, whispers, sometimes knocks on tent walls. No one had ever been hurt, and nothing had ever been proven, but enough people had left early that it had become something of a local rumor. The Silent Walker, some called him, a figure that wandered the woods at night, never speaking, never touching, just observing. waiting, listening. No one knew who he was or what he wanted. Since then, I've gone camping plenty of times, but never alone, and never near that forest. I still love the outdoors, still find peace in the quiet of the trees, but I can't sleep near thin walls anymore. I need distance. I need doors. That night taught me something important. Sometimes, the most terrifying presence is the one that does nothing at all, just walks around you in silence, letting your imagination do the rest. Because the truth is, what scares us most isn't always what someone might do, but what they're capable of if they ever decide to stop watching and start acting. Story 12. The motel room across the hall. It was the summer of 2018 when I took a last-minute road trip through the western states. I was between jobs, drifting from one idea to another, searching for something, maybe a reset, maybe just distraction. I had no plan, just a map, a tank of gas, and a willingness to be alone for a while. That night I pulled off a long stretch of highway and found a roadside motel that looked like it hadn't changed since the late 70s. Neon sign humming, paint chipping on the wooden posts. But it had a vacancy, and at that point, that was all I needed. I checked in just before midnight. The clerk was half asleep, barely looked up as he handed me a room key with the number 108 scratched into the tag. The room was at the far end of the hall, second floor, overlooking the empty parking lot. I parked my car directly in front, hauled my bag up the stairs and let myself in. The room was functional. A bed, a small table, a lamp missing its shade. The air smelled faintly of mildew and old cigarettes, even though the sign outside said non-smoking. I didn't care. I just wanted to sleep. I kicked off my shoes, dropped my bag, and turned on the TV for background noise. The screen flickered for a moment, before settling on an old game show rerun. I let it play while I brushed my teeth and crawled into bed. I wasn't asleep long when I heard it. A knock. Not on my door, but the one across the hall. I waited, figuring someone had the wrong room or was meeting a friend. But there was no answer. And then it came again. 3 slow knocks, then silence. A few seconds later, I heard the handle across the hall jiggle, like someone was trying to open it. Then, again, silence. I sat up, peeking through the curtain toward the hall window, but I couldn't see anyone from that angle. The motel had no cameras that I could see, no front desk security, just me, a locked door, and thin walls. I heard footsteps next, heavy and uneven. Whoever it was paced back and forth slowly, stopping again at the door across the hall, then at mine. I froze. The footsteps stopped directly in front of my door. I could hear breathing now, slow, shallow, and close. The air in the room felt heavier, thicker, as if it was pressing in against the windows. I didn't move. I didn't make a sound. I watched the doorknob. It twitched, just a small, deliberate turn, testing it. I had locked the deadbolt, but still, I reached for the chair beside the table and quietly wedged it under the knob. Whoever it was didn't knock again. They just stood there for another minute, then slowly walked away. The hallway creaked under their weight, and eventually the sound faded. I waited a full 5 minutes before peeking through the peephole. The hallway was empty. I didn't sleep the rest of the night, just laid there, heart racing, listening for every shift in sound. I never called the front desk. I had the overwhelming sense that it wouldn't matter, that there was no one to call who could do anything about it. When the sun finally rose, I packed my bag, skipped the shower, and walked down the stairs without looking back. I returned the key to the drop box and drove off without a word. It was only once I'd put some distance between myself and that building that I finally exhaled. But the strangest part happened weeks later. I was telling a friend about the encounter over coffee. She listened intently, growing quiet. Then she told me something that made the hair on my arm stand up. A year earlier, her cousin had stayed in a motel that sounded eerily similar, just off the same highway, just outside the same town. He had reported something strange too. A man in the hallway, knocking slowly on random doors, always in the middle of the night. But in his case, the man didn't leave. He waited, knocked again, tried the handles. Eventually, he vanished before police could arrive. Nothing was ever found. No name, no record of a guest matching his description. I searched online afterward, curious, maybe hoping to rationalize it. I found a handful of anonymous forum posts describing similar stories. Motel hallways, middle of the night knocks, jiggling door handles. Some chalked it up to drug addicts, others to local crime. But no arrests, no official reports, just stories. Different towns, different motels, same feeling. The kind of thing that makes you wonder if it's all connected, or if some people just wander, not looking for money, not looking for help, just testing doors, watching, waiting for one that opens. I never went back to that motel. I've passed the highway exit a few times since, and every time I feel that same tension rise up in my chest. I glance down the road as I drive by, wondering if that place is still there, if someone else is staying in room 108, if they'll hear the same slow knock tonight. That experience changed how I travel. I check for deadbolts. I use the extra locks. I push furniture in front of doors without shame. And no matter how tired I am, I never ever open the door in the middle of the night without asking who's there first. I don't know who the man was. Maybe no one does. Maybe he was just passing through, looking for a mistake. Maybe he was something worse. But what I do know is that fear doesn't always come from violence or chaos. Sometimes it's quiet, patient, a soft knock in the dark when you're all alone, in a strange place, miles from home. The kind of fear that leaves no scars, but never truly leaves you either. Story 13. The Roadside Hitchhiker. It was late September when I was driving back from visiting my sister in a nearby city. The night had settled over the interstate like a thick blanket, the headlights of passing cars blurring in the darkness. I was about halfway home when I realized I hadn't seen another vehicle in nearly 20 minutes. The road was empty, the sky overcast, and a light drizzle began to tap gently against my windshield. The hum of the engine was steady, and I was starting to feel that strange hypnotic sensation you sometimes get when driving long distances, when time seems to blur and the road feels endless. That's when I saw him. He was standing on the shoulder just beyond the guardrail, half lit by my headlights. A tall man dressed in jeans and a dark hoodie, standing perfectly still with his thumb out. At first I thought it was strange. Who hitches rides this late, in the rain, in the middle of nowhere? But something about his posture made me uneasy. He wasn't shivering. He wasn't pacing or looking around like someone desperate to get off the road. He was just... I passed him slowly, glancing in the rearview mirror, expecting him to fade into the mist and shadows behind me. But he didn't. He remained perfectly visible in my mirror, longer than he should have been. It felt like his face was turned toward me, like he knew I was watching him go. A strange chill moved through me. I pressed the gas a little harder. Just a few minutes later I came around a bend in the road, and my stomach dropped. There he was again, standing on the shoulder, in the exact same pose, just as still. Same clothes, same height, same calm presence. It was impossible. I hadn't passed any turn-offs, no intersections, no way for him to beat me there. This time, I didn't slow down. I kept driving, refusing to look directly at him. I tried to convince myself that maybe I'd seen someone else. Maybe it was the trick of the light. Maybe I was just tired. But the unease kept growing. I turned on the radio, trying to drown it out with some music. Static filled the speakers for a moment, then cut to silence. No signal. Just the hum of the engine again. As I rounded another bend, I saw a dimly lit gas station ahead and felt an enormous wave of relief. I pulled in quickly, parked under the flickering lights, and went inside to grab some coffee and steady my nerves. The attendant behind the counter was an older man with a calm demeanor. I tried to act casual as I asked if he'd seen anyone hitchhiking up the road. He gave me a long look, then slowly shook his head. "Not tonight," he said, "but you're not the first to ask." That sentence hit me harder than I expected. I pressed him gently, asking what he meant. He told me there had been stories, drivers reporting the same figure, the same man, seen again and again along that stretch of highway, always at night, always alone, always appearing in multiple places without explanation. He said people called him the Echo. The name gave me chills. I asked if anyone had picked him up. The man nodded slowly. "Some did, not many. Those who did, they don't always come back the same." He wouldn't elaborate, just stared at me like he was remembering something he wished he could forget. I left the station with my coffee, heart racing. I sat in my car for a few minutes before deciding what to do. I considered staying the night in the lot, but the idea of waiting there, surrounded by nothing but forest and fog, was almost worse. So I drove. Slowly, carefully, eyes scanning every bend in the road ahead. For nearly an hour, the highway remained empty. I didn't see the hitchhiker again, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still out there, just out of sight, waiting for the next bend, the next moment of weakness. Eventually, I made it home just after 2 a.m. I parked in the driveway and sat in my car, hands still tight on the wheel. I didn't sleep well that night. Every sound outside made me check the window. Heavy shadow on the wall made my breath catch. I told myself I'd imagined it, that it was just a strange coincidence, a tired mind playing tricks, but the fear never fully left. A few weeks later, I took a different route when visiting my sister. I didn't want to see that stretch of highway again. But curiosity got the better of me, and I searched online for stories. I found them. Threads and forums full of similar encounters. People describing the same man, the same impossible appearances. Some had picked him up. One claimed the man never spoke, just sat in silence until they dropped him off at an abandoned rest stop. Another claimed their passenger disappeared mid-ride, vanished without a trace. No door opening, no sound, just gone. To this day, I don't know what I saw. Maybe it was real. Maybe it was something stranger than that. But what I do know is that I've never driven that road again at night. And if I ever see a man standing by the side of the highway, alone and still, I won't stop. Because some things out there aren't just lost. Some things are looking for something. And if you're not careful, they might decide that what they're looking for is you. Story 14, The Basement Light. When I was growing up, we lived in an older house on the outskirts of a quiet town. The house had a kind of charm. Creaky floorboards, floral wallpaper from decades past, and a garden that seemed to have a mind of its own. But it also had a basement. Not the finished kind with a game room or laundry machines. This was the cold, cement-walled kind. A single bulb hung from a wire in the middle of the ceiling, and cobwebs clung to the corners like they had always belonged. I hated going down there as a kid. The air always felt damp, the light always flickered, and the silence, it was too heavy, like the basement was holding its breath, waiting for something. The stairs were wooden and groaned with each step, and I only ever went down if my parents asked me to grab something: old holiday decorations, a box of tools, a jar of canned peaches. I always moved quickly, never staying longer than necessary, but as I got older, I convinced myself it was just a basement, nothing to be afraid of, just shadows and dust, and for a long time, nothing ever happened to challenge that belief, until one night when I was 16, home alone while my parents attended a dinner party in the next town over. It had been a quiet evening, some TV, a frozen pizza, scrolling on my phone. Then, around 10:30, the power went out. At first, I thought it was the weather. The wind had picked up earlier and the neighborhood had old wiring. I grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer and went to check the fuse box, which unfortunately was, you guessed it, down in the basement. I opened the door at the top of the stairs and felt that familiar wave of cold air drift up. With a sigh, I clicked on the flashlight and made my way down the stairs. The bulb overhead was dead, of course. I reached the bottom, stepping carefully, and headed toward the fuse box tucked in the far corner. I opened the panel, looked over the switches, and started checking for anything tripped. And that's when I heard it, a soft click behind me. I froze. The basement door at the top of the stairs had closed, not slammed, just gently shut, like someone had slowly pushed it until it clicked into place. I waited, flashlight aimed toward the stairs. Nothing. No voices. No footsteps. Just a hum of silence. It stands to reason that, how they have it, Abroshta, he whispered to me. Aman tu karat. I quickly flipped the switches and restored the power. The bulb above me flickered back to life, bathing the space in its pale yellowish glow. I felt some relief, but it didn't last, because the light didn't stop flickering. It pulsed steadily, almost rhythmically, like it was being tampered with. I looked up at it, confused, and noticed something else. There was a figure reflected faintly in the shiny metal of the fuse box door. It wasn't me. I was crouched. The figure was standing. I spun around, heart leaping into my throat, but no one was there. Just the basement, the stairs, and the slowly swinging pull cord for the light. I hadn't touched it. I hadn't even been near it. I stood up, backed away, and felt an overwhelming urge to leave. The air had shifted, grown colder, thicker, like something unseen had entered the room. I bolted up the stairs, grabbed the doorknob and found it locked. Not stuck, locked, from the outside. I rattled it, called out again, slammed my fist against it. Still nothing. Panic surged through me. I checked my phone. No signal. I paced at the top of the stairs trying to figure out what to do. I looked down into the basement again and noticed something that hadn't been there before. A shadow stretching across the floor, but not from me. It was long, narrow, and stretched toward the corner opposite the fuse box. I took a cautious step down and aimed the flashlight in that direction. The light hit the wall and nothing else. No figure, no object that could cast that shape. And yet the shadow remained, unmoving. I ran back up, tried the door again, and suddenly, without warning, it opened. No resistance, no sound, just swung inward, revealing the quiet hallway beyond. I stepped out, slammed it shut behind me, and locked it from my side. I spent the rest of the night in the living room with every light on, TV playing quietly, eyes flicking toward the hallway that led to the basement. When my parents got home just after midnight, I didn't mention it. I didn't know how to explain it without sounding irrational or afraid of something I'd once dismissed as childhood imagination. But the next morning, I found something that made my stomach turn. The light bulb in the basement had been unscrewed, just slightly, enough that it would flicker, enough that it could be twisted back into place with the lightest touch. But I hadn't gone near it, and more disturbing, the pull cord was wrapped around the bulb in a way that I'd never seen before, like it had been tied into a loop, like a noose. I didn't say anything to my parents. I just avoided the basement after that, made excuses, left lights on. I never went back down alone, and even when I had to, I never stayed longer than I needed. Years later, after we'd moved out and the house was sold, I told my mum the story. She went pale and confessed that she always hated that basement too. That once, years earlier, she'd seen what she thought was a man standing near the shelves in the corner, until he simply wasn't there anymore. My dad dismissed it all, chalking it up to nerves and bad lighting. But I know what I felt, what I heard, what I saw reflected behind me. Some places remember things, some places don't want to be left alone. And sometimes the light that flickers in the darkness isn't broken. It's warning you, gently, before something worse takes its place. Story 15, The Forest Nook. I grew up in a rural area surrounded by dense woods. Our house sat at the end of a gravel road that few people ever travelled unless they lived nearby. It wasn't the kind of place where you got surprise visitors or unexpected knocks on the door, especially not at night. Our neighbours were friendly but distant, and everyone respected each other's space. The forest was vast and beautiful, filled with hiking trails, streams, and deer paths that twisted endlessly into the trees. As a kid, I would wander through the woods for hours, completely at peace. But when I turned 18 and began staying home alone more often, I started to notice how different the forest felt after dark. It wasn't just the lack of light, it was the silence. During the day, the forest is alive with chirping birds, rustling leaves, and the occasional snap of a twig beneath an animal's step. But at night, that life vanished. The woods became still, watching, like the trees themselves were holding their breath. My parents had gone on a weekend trip, and I was home alone. I didn't mind. I had a long list of shows to binge, leftovers in the fridge, and a few assignments I could finish at my own pace. The first night passed uneventfully, quiet and calm, but the second night changed everything. It was around midnight when I heard it. A knock. Not on the front door, but on the back, facing the woods. It was soft, almost polite. 3 slow, deliberate taps. I paused my show and sat perfectly still, waiting to see if it would come again. Another knock followed, just as soft. I stood up, walked cautiously to the kitchen, and peeked out the back window. But all I saw was darkness. The porch light had gone out the week before, and I hadn't replaced the bulb yet. I couldn't see more than a few feet beyond the glass. I stood there for a moment longer, listening, my heart beating louder than the silence around me. Then I heard footsteps, barely audible, crunching softly through the dead leaves just beyond the porch. They didn't come closer, just paced slowly along the edge of the yard, back and forth. I flicked off the kitchen light to reduce the glare on the window and pressed my face closer to the glass. Still nothing. Whoever or whatever was out there, they were staying just out of sight. I backed away, locked the door, and returned to the living room, trying to rationalize what I'd heard. Maybe an animal had wandered up to the door. Maybe the wind had knocked something loose. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it had been intentional, measured, human. I turned the TV off and sat in silence for a while, listening. No more knocks, no more steps. Eventually I went to bed, locking my bedroom door even though I never usually did. I slept lightly, waking at every sound. At one point I thought I heard the front doorknob rattle faintly, but I was too afraid to check. Morning eventually came, bringing with it a kind of fragile safety. Sunlight poured in through the curtains, birds returned to the trees, and I told myself I had overreacted. Maybe I had imagined it all in this stillness of night. Maybe it had been nothing. But later that afternoon, I found something that made my stomach twist. Outside, on the back porch, right near the door, were 3 small indentations in the dirt. Not footprints, not handprints, just 3 marks, spaced perfectly apart, pressed deep into the soil, like someone had knelt there or waited. I didn't mention it to my parents when they returned the next day. I wasn't sure how to explain it, and I didn't want them to think I'd lost my mind while they were gone. Life returned to normal for a while, or at least pretended to. But the next time they left town, it happened again. Same knock, same steps in the yard, same silence. Only this time, I didn't wait around to investigate. I locked every door, turned off the lights, and stayed in the center of the house with a flashlight and my dog curled up beside me. Over the years, I heard similar stories from neighbors. Strange sounds near the woods, unexplained knocks, shadows glimpsed just out of reach. No one ever saw anything clearly. No one ever caught a figure in the act. Just stories passed in hushed tones, like the forest had secrets that it whispered only to those who stayed too long after dark. Some folks said it was a drifter living out there. Others swore it was something older, something that didn't belong to our world anymore. I never got an answer. But I stopped walking in the woods alone, especially after sunset. There's something about the way that knock sounded, measured, patient, confident, like it wasn't asking to be let in, like it already knew it was close enough, like it didn't need the door. I moved away eventually, but sometimes when I visit home I still glance toward the trees at night. The forest still stands, silent and watchful, and though the porch light has long been fixed, it somehow feels dimmer than it should, and every so often, when the wind dies and the air holds still, I swear I can hear it again. That faint, familiar knock. It reminds me that some doors don't need to be opened to be crossed. Some presences don't need an invitation. And sometimes, the scariest thing in the world is knowing that something came to your home once and may one day decide to return.